Welcome to a coffee chat in a van. If you haven't been to one of these videos before, this is just us sitting around and having a little informal chat. So I've had lots of questions about the coffee grinder that I use. And this is it. This is a Hario Mini Slim hand grinder. And I've been using one of these for quite a number of years. This is actually my second hand grinder and my second Hario Mini Slim hand grinder. The first Hario Mini Slim hand grinder that I owned, I used for about 9 years, and it started to wear out, and so I replaced it with same model, and I have been fairly happy with it. I do prefer a hand grinder, and we should talk a little bit about that and about why I prefer a hand grinder over a electric coffee grinder. But first, we should probably discuss why grind your coffee by yourself. Why not just have the coffee shop that you're buying your coffee from grind your coffee, or why not just use the coffee grinder in the grocery store when you buy your coffee? And while you certainly could do that, there are a number of reasons why you may not want to grind your coffee ahead of time. So the answer is really quite simple. Coffee beans are a food item, and like most food items, they are perishable. And what makes coffee beans a little more perishable than a lot of other food items is that they're roasted, and coffee beans contain oil. Those oils can go rancid over time, and the more surface area that the coffee beans have, the quicker they'll go rancid. So a whole bean has very little surface area, where a ground bean has lots of surface area. So that lots of surface area means the oils in the beans can go rancid, and the flavor can degrade very quickly. Now you can cut down on this exposure to air by just keeping the beans sealed in the container that they came in, whether that be a bag or a tin or a plastic tub, and then keeping it folded up. And I like to use just a little binder clip to keep my bags closed up. Now, one reason why I use a bag and I don't resort to a commercial product like a little tin or something to put my coffee beans in is this little bag takes up very little space, whereas a big tin or a glass container or something would take up a little more space. And I live in a tiny little van, and so I don't have a lot of space for things like that. The other thing is I buy little bits of coffee at a time, and then I try to use them up as quickly as possible. So that means they don't have a lot of chance to get exposed to air, to go rancid, and to lose flavor. But of course, I also like to buy whole beans, and I like to grind them myself. And like I said, I use this little hand grinder. Now, you may be wondering why I choose to use a hand grinder versus an electric grinder. One reason is that I live on solar power here in my little van, and for one, I don't have a lot of space, but two, I don't feel that having an electric grinder is a good use of power. I think it's just quite simple and easy just to grind my coffee by hand. That's kind of the simple answer, but if you go back years and years, I drank very dark roast coffee. That was the coffee that I preferred. I wanted the darkest roast coffee I could get my hands on, and I would grind it to order and brew it up as I needed it. And I really liked it. And at first, I really liked my electric coffee grinder. It was quite simple. I would push a button on the top of the grinder. It would grind the coffee that I needed, and did it rather quickly. Now, it had a few faults. One, it was as loud as a jet engine in my little kitchen, and wasn't really a thing that I wanted to use first thing in the morning. I really didn't like listening to it first thing in the morning, being that it was that loud. The other thing was that I found over time was because I was using very dark roast coffee, the coffee was very oily and it would clog up the machine. And so every 2 or 3 days, I would have to take a chopstick and a paintbrush and a spoon and clean out that coffee grinder. It was always a mess. And after a few months, I found that that coffee grinder started to really stink. I did the best I could to get it cleaned out, but that dark roast coffee that I was using started to go rancid, and the oils would come out of the ground coffee beans and get stuck in the plastic assembly of that coffee grinder, started to stink of old, stale coffee. And I did everything I could to clean out that coffee grinder, but because most of it was plastic, I just couldn't get it clean. Now, my intention with buying the little hand grinder was purely to have a hand grinder that I could use when I was away from home, say if I was on a camping trip. I had every intention of buying another electric grinder to leave on my kitchen counter so that I would have an easy time in the morning of grinding my coffee. I just wanted a grinder that was not quite so loud and maybe did a little better job, was a bit easier to clean than that old electric grinder. But once I did some research, I realized that unless I was willing to spend somewhere over $350, I wasn't going to find an electric grinder that would work as well as my little $40 Hario hand grinder. And my best option really was just to stick with the hand grinder. And so that's what I did. I just gave up on the idea of having an electric coffee grinder. I didn't want to spend the money on that, not that I could anyway. And I found that this little $40 hand grinder actually worked pretty well. But if you're going to ask me if I recommend this little Hario Mini Slim hand grinder, if I think you should buy one, I would say probably not. Now, the reason for that is simple. Back 15 years or so ago when I bought this Hario grinder for the first time, it was a very good quality grinder for a hand grinder. Back then, there were very few decent hand grinders for coffee, and most of them were not very good quality, and the Hario was really one of the better quality hand grinders at the time. Flash forward to now, and the Hario doesn't really hold up very well compared to some other hand grinders that are on the market. And the reason for that is really quite simple. The Harios have a ceramic burr set that does the coffee grinding, and while those ceramic burrs were good 15 years ago, they don't really hold up to some of the other grinders that are available nowadays. So nowadays there are lots of grinders that have stainless steel burrs, and they do a much better job of grinding the coffee. They grind the coffee a little bit more consistently, and they last a little bit longer than these Hario grinders do. So if you're in the market for a coffee grinder, my suggestion is if you're looking for an electric coffee grinder, $300 would be the bare minimum of an electric coffee grinder to get a good, decent quality one that is going to last and that gives you a good uniform coffee grind. Now, when it comes to hand grinders, it's a whole different story. You can get a very good hand grinder that will actually outperform a $300 electric grinder for less than, say, $100. If you are looking for a hand grinder and price is your main concern, then the Hario grinders are a decent option. But if you spend just a little bit more, you can get a hand grinder, say, for between $50 and $100 that will outperform any electric grinder that costs up to, say, $300 to $350. So if you're in the market for a coffee grinder, I would highly suggest you look at a hand grinder. you'll get a much better budget option. Even if you spend about $100, you're going to get a very good quality grinder that's going to last for a long time, and it will give you a very consistent grind of coffee. And that's really what you want. You want a consistent coffee grind, because the more you can get your coffee making consistent, the better your finished cup of coffee will be. So if you're wondering why I still have been using this little grinder while saying it's not really the best option, the answer to that is really quite simple. This works well enough that the return of investment for me to spend, say, $50 or $100 really wouldn't be worth it. This little Hario hand grinder, because I already own it, works good enough that I am happy with just keeping it and using it until it wears out. And if it's anything like my last Hario Mini Slim, I've got several more years of use to get out of this little grinder. But like I said, there are better options. The other option is just have your coffee ground where you buy it and buy less coffee and drink it quicker. Then you don't need a grinder at all. That's the other option, and it's probably a cheaper one at that. Hey, thanks for watching, everybody. I really appreciate it.